The driver is being shielded by the USA. This surely gives a shocking picture to the rest of the world that the USA and its leaders may well be viewed as shallow and lacking in integrity. What can we do as a tribute to young Harry to ensure the driver of the vehicle that killed him, killed this 19-year-old, returns to the UK to face British justice?
Okay. Peter Bone, obviously today there have been developments where Harry Dunn's family spokesperson told us earlier on LBC that they're putting forward the idea of sending Prince Andrew to America in return for Anne Secoulis, which I don't really think stacks up in any shape or form, but obviously a tragic case. Extradition law is very complicated. We didn't send Gary McKinnon and one or two other people to be extradited to the US when they wanted him. Do you think that there is any prospect of Anne Secoulis being returned here?
Well, I think it's possible. Obviously, I'm a Northamptonshire MP. This happened in our county. And do I think she should come over here? Yes, I do. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know the legal ramifications, but I do know there's a serious problem because there was another accident just outside that on the bend, and there were a number of near misses. So we needed what we really do. We've got to sort that problem out. We don't want another one of these cases. And I was speaking to the Police and Crime Commissioner about this, and there's some effort to go inside the US base and train them on what's happening. I mean, it looks like a tragic accident. It's a shame that she went back to the USA rather than face. And I think if she'd faced justice here, she would have been dealt with very fairly. I don't think there was anything to worry about.
Jack Dromey, do you think that this case is being treated any differently to any other?
I don't think it's being treated with sufficient seriousness. What happened to Harry Dunn?
By whom?
By the government. I'll come to that. What happened to Harry Dunn was outrageous, tragic. I'm being particularly struck by Christmas time, his friends gathering where he was killed and putting down memories of him. By all accounts, he was a fine young man. It is absolutely indefensible that Secoulis has refused to come back on the one hand and that the American government are shielding her on the other. Now, I think there's been some welcome, strong statements by our government, but what it needs now is strong action.
But what kind of action?
Extradition proceedings.
Surely all they can do is, well, they were launched, but all they can do is say strong words. There's not much else they can do.
I think they have to pursue the extradition proceedings to their logical conclusion, which is if somebody is accused of a serious crime, because that's what this is, then they should face justice. So I think that our government should make it absolutely clear to the American government that they will not rest until the family of Harry Dunn see that the woman, beg your pardon, who killed their son is back in this country, facing justice in this country. And I agree with Peter. I think she would be treated fairly, but the time has come for her to stop hiding away in America and come back to Britain.
Jemma Forte, Sarah Vine wrote in a column in the Daily Mail recently that she had driven on the wrong side of the road in France, I think for quite a substantial period of time. And she said, this, obviously it's tragic, but it could have been any one of us that this happened to. Should we have any sympathy with Anne Secoulis?
I think we would have done if she'd done the honourable thing and very, very quickly come back and gone, I just panicked and I went. Yes. The longer it goes on, the more despicable it becomes because it's cowardly. This is a moral dilemma. And I like to think that if it was me, I'd have the integrity to go and own up and go, look, it was an accident, which I'm sure it was. And, the thing is, it's not going to go away. She thinks it is. If you're a parent and your child is taken in this manner, you can tell that those parents are not going to rest. They won't. They never will. I can only imagine and vaguely empathise with the horror. But they're going to be driven. They've got more motivation than anybody to keep at this. So I think she's not going to avoid it forever.
Claire Fox, I interviewed Mike Pompeo last week and asked him about this case, expecting him to be very, very trenchant and say, no, she's never going to come back. But he didn't answer the question in that way. He was much more empathetic than I expected him to be. And he did leave the door ajar for her to be extradited, which, given he'd already made the decision that she shouldn't be extradited, was slightly confusing. But do you think the American government might be persuaded to change?
Well, first of all, I think that everybody can see that a sense of justice has been offended by this. And I think you're right, Jemma, that it's very much a moral decision. I think the law makes it difficult. There was, on the one hand, talk of some diplomatic immunity, but you've rightly pointed out and reminded us, Iain, of Gary McKinnon, and there's lots of discussion at the moment about Julian Assange, and extradition cases tend to have a kind of political tinge to them. It's not so straightforward, and I remember hearing the mother of Gary McKinnon speaking. It was heartbreaking, and I didn't want him to be extradited. I mean, so you can see that depending on where you're hearing it from. But I do think that So I think that to a certain extent, I don't want this to escalate into a political storm, even though I have every sympathy with the family. But I do think that we have to be careful about just demanding extradition in this way, because actually there are times when, even though I think it's the right thing to do, extradition law can actually be rather unjust as well, and you have to be careful of not turning extradition into a political football, as it were. That's my concern.
Carol, thank you very much for your question. Let's quickly squeeze in another one before we go to the news. By the way, all the streams are working with sound. Thank goodness for that. Sean is in concert. Hello, Sean.
Hello, mate. How are you doing?
Very well. What's your question?
What's it got to do with the House and Commons, what people wear?
You're referring to Tracy Brabin, aren't you?
I am,
wearing her off-the-shoulder outfit.
Oh, give her one, man. For God's sake. You know what I mean? The treating the ridicule the poor last man. It's not as if she got her boobies out.
I was tempted to wear something similar.
Was it a Tory MP that complained about it?
Was it a Tory? I don't think it was. I mean, I've discussed these issues with my good friend Jackie Smith on our For the Many podcast regularly. And do you remember when she was Home Secretary, she got into a similar situation? Well, she got into a similar situation. She was at the dispatch box with, shall we say, a fairly low-cut top on, and it was like almost front page news the next day, and you think, well, what kind of era do we live in? Jemma Forte.
Yes, I was actually tempted to wear a top like that here tonight, just to see if anyone would notice. I've got to be honest. I would have noticed. When I first saw the picture, I didn't really think it was that inappropriate. And then there was obviously so much furore. I'm in the minority.
We should explain for people who haven't seen this. Tracy Brabin, former Coronation Street actress, she's now Shadow Employment Minister. I think I'm right in saying DCMS. DCMS. I'm so out of date. Yeah. And she was at the dispatch box making a speech in. I mean, it was. Could it be described as a cocktail dress?
It's like a black off-the-shoulder. It's from ASOS, apparently, and apparently it's sold out. So she's had an effect there.
Okay. And you don't see anything wrong with that?
It wasn't standard House of Commons wear, admittedly, and the response has been that if it was a man dressed in a scruffy manner, that might not be appropriate either.
Have you seen most male MPs?
Well, I was going to say, we're both very smart. You both got ties on here. I'd say Dominic Cummings needs to maybe smart enough his act a little bit.
Jack Dromey.
I think the response that she's had is terrible. I mean, I know Tracy very well. She's outstanding. Actually, she's got a severely broken leg at the moment, and one of the reasons why she was leaning over is because she has struggled at the dispatch box. Yeah. And so what? So her off-the-shoulder dress momentarily slips off the shoulder, and then suddenly she's the butt of outrageous sexism on social media, which ran on a grand scale, and it was very offensive. And she, by the way, was upset over it. And she was entitled to be upset. I think you're absolutely right, Jemma, at this point about would it have happened with a man? I think the answer is no. And in relation to our friend who just rung in, just more generally, I think the rules are now not quite as straight-laced as they once were. You can't turn up in a pair of shorts on the one hand, but casual gear on the other. But coming back to the more serious thing, Tracy did nothing wrong and should never have been subjected to, in the words of one of her team, forgive the language, the shit that came in her direction.
I do apologise on Jack's behalf for that. We are before 9 o'clock, Jack. Peter, behave yourself.
Well, look, if we had a dress code, I would never be an MP, and I doubt if Boris would ever be Prime Minister.
Straighten your tie.
Yeah, I mean, look at that tie's too long. I mean, goodness gracious, what a load of rubbish. I mean, the thing is, it depends what she says. That's the interesting thing.
Spot on.
I just couldn't. I mean, the one thing is, don't look at Twitter because it's ridiculous. By the way, I didn't think there wasn't the slightest thing wrong with what she was wearing anyway. Yeah. But it's what people say that should be people listening, not what they look like.
Well, I think the way she reacted to this was actually very good. She tweeted this, and I'm going to say to my producer that these are words I'm quoting and you're not to dump them. She says, "Hello, sorry I don't have time to reply to all of you commenting on this, but I can confirm I'm not a slag, hungover, a tart, about to breastfeed, a slapper, drunk." I can't read out the last bit, it has to be said. Who knew people could get so emotional over a shoulder? That's exactly the right response, isn't it, Claire?
Absolutely. The thing is, one thing to note is, for about 2 days, I read serious broadsheet articles discussing Dominic Cummings' dress sense and what it meant. And I thought exactly the same as I think about this, which is, for goodness sake, there's plenty to critique Cummings on without going down whether he's wearing sloppy trousers, what it means.
I'm sorry, if you show half your backside when you're walking into number 10, that is not a good look for anybody.
Yes, but this is what people have said about Tracy Brabin. If she's got off the shoulder, I'm not agreeing, I'm actually going with the I don't care what he's wearing brigade. I think that there is a sense in which one expects decorum and respect in the House, and it's just a question of interpreting that. And it's interesting because one of the things that, as Gemma's wanted to raise the flag-waving episode, one of the things I realised when I was in the European Parliament was that actually they had very strict dress codes. I think one of the Green MEPs, Magic, got in trouble for wearing a hat. The Lib Dems didn't get in trouble for wearing their T-shirts. There was disputes about whether you were allowed to have flags in front of you or not, how you were to behave. And to a certain extent, I think that on occasion, people will be offended, know whether you like it or not, about what they see as disrespect for the office of being elected. I thought in relation to this particular incident of the dress, it was ridiculously over the top. And some of the comments that were made were obviously vile and horrible. But can we all take a step back again? That's what I'm saying is, don't be superficial. Don't go with Twitter images. Find out what the context was, even in the European Parliament, with flags. Find out what the bigger story was and actually talk politics for once instead of talking dress codes.
But Iain, your point, by the way, is a rather horrific thought about Dominic Cummings, builder's bottom.
Yeah, we don't really
going into number 10 Downing Street.
I think
Can we move on to the next subject, please?
The lady in question had come from an event as well where she was talking about music, where so she dressed for two things. I can relate to that. Sometimes it's difficult.
Right. Do keep your calls coming. 0345 6060 973. A lot of the questions at the moment are on things we've already discussed, so let's have some new subjects, and we'll come back to your questions in just a moment. It's 8:33 News Headlines with Caroline Rundell.
The Director General of the World Health Organization has asked for £500 million to help countries address the expected spread of the coronavirus. Nearly 500 people have now died from the illness in China. The head of UK counter-terrorism policing has backed plans to keep offenders in prison for longer. The government wants to end the automatic early release of terrorists following Sunday's attack in Streatham. Senators will vote this evening on whether to throw Donald Trump out of office. The Republican majority is expected to acquit him. LBC weather, chilly with mostly clear skies tonight, light rain for the northwest of Scotland and a low of -3 degrees.
This is LBC. Have you ever lost money on a stocks and shares ISA or an investment bond sold by a bank like Lloyds or Halifax? The first thing Goodwin Barrett told me was I could make a claim myself and even take it to the Financial Ombudsman for free if unsuccessful. I looked into it, but I'd much rather spend my time doing something else. Goodwin Barrett ran my claim on my behalf instead. No stress, all the way from investigation to the final payout. Get the compensation you could be owed. Text GOOD to 78900.
You know it'll happen. That dodgy boiler will finally pack up, and it'll do it on the coldest day of the year. So the moment you decide you can't put it off any longer, get a quote from British Gas. You can spread the cost of a new boiler interest-free over 2 years and get £200 off when you get a quote by the 29th of February, or £400 off for existing home care customers. British Gas, here to solve. Search British Gas new boiler. Conditions apply.
Swell Heating is on a myth-busting mission. It really isn't cheaper to leave your heating on all day. But there is lots of smart technology that can cut your heating bills. For specialist advice on innovative heating devices, visit swellheating.com. Rely on us to keep you warm.
London, we have a problem. Our air is toxic, and driving polluting vehicles is the main cause. The air that I breathe, that my friends breathe, that my mum and dad breathe, and that you breathe, can cause lifelong diseases. But there are solutions, like making our transport greener and creating better spaces to walk and cycle.
These are just some of the ways the Mayor of London and TfL are helping to improve air quality across the capital. Find out how you can make a difference too. Search Let London Breathe. To the Mayor of London and TfL, every journey matters.
I pledge
to leave a gift in my will.
Cancer Research UK.
To live a fuller life.
To save more lives like my mum's.
Gifts in wills fund over a third of Cancer Research UK's life-saving research.
I pledge to continue researching.
To find new treatments for patients.
To stop cancer from coming back.
Pledge right now to leave a gift in your will to Cancer Research UK, and together we will beat cancer for future generations. To find out more, search Cancer Research UK, pledge.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
8:36 0345 6060973. You can watch us on the LBC website, YouTube channel, Facebook and Twitter pages as well. Jack Dromey, Claire Fox, Peter Bone, Jemma Forte here with us until 9 o'clock. Let's go to Anthony in Staines. Anthony, what's your question, please?
Hello, Ian. Hi there, panel. My question is a simple one. How would you privatise the BBC?
How would you privatise the BBC? Not would you privatise the BBC? Well, that's a very specific question. Claire Fox.
So I wouldn't privatise the BBC, but I think that the question speaks to a very lively and active debate going on about the nature of broadcasting at the moment. I mean, the consultation's just been announced today in terms of decriminalising on the licence fee. Of course it should be decriminalised, whether you pay or not, I mean. But I have never had so many conversations as over the last year about the nature of mainstream media, as they say. And this, of course, we'll all know, either comes from people who saw the BBC as being biased pro-Brexit or biased against Brexit. I mean, you know, we'll all have followed these things. Everyone from Andrew Adonis saying the BBC is an outrageous front for Brexit arguments on the one hand, or lots of people saying it represented a cosmopolitan elite outlook. But I do think it's lost its way, and I say that as a Radio 4 regular. I mean, I'm a kind of BBC to the bone. I've got the whole Reithian thing still in my blood, but I do know that now I often will listen to LBC. I want serious talk conversation.
You redeemed yourself that well.
Absolutely, it's all right. No, but I mean, as does everyone, right? I mean, what's happened is serious political discussion is not to be guaranteed on the BBC. There's no doubt about it. And people who are political junkies, and by the way, that's a lot of the country these days, because if Brexit's done nothing else, it's radicalised millions of people who didn't think they were interested in current affairs or politics. They now watch like a hawk. They watch Newsnight. They watch these programmes, and they just feel that they're not being well served. And I think then that the BBC's way of reacting to that has been a certain amount of self-loathing and self-criticism, but usually on the basis that it's not relevant to young people enough, and the next minute you get a programme that's Shakespeare in rap or something. I'm caricaturing it, but not much.
Really not?
I'm really not. I know, that's the worst thing. Every time I talk to a producer who works in the BBC, or anyone I know who works at the BBC, they themselves are tearing their hair out saying, oh my God, we've got a perfectly good programme, and they're just making it go relevant by dumbing it down to an imagined audience of young people who they think have got the attention of an at. I mean, it's just all
there's
the
a particular podcast
nonsense
that I listen to, which the BBC produce, which I'm not going to name because I don't want to upset the presenters of it, but they have a guest on each time, and for the last sort of 6 weeks it's been a young person to try and get the young people to listen. And of course I'm thinking, I don't know who this person is, I've no interest in them, why would I continue listening?
I know. And just finally on that, I mean, one of the things that, you know, I have for 20 years, I think, been on the Moral Maze. I obviously gave that up when I went off to be an elected politician. And actually, I also, in my Academy of Ideas work with lots of sixth formers. And I discovered, to my joy over the years, that many of them listen to the Moral Maze, or their teachers encourage them to, and they enjoy it.
That's enough plugging for a programme which
No, but the
goes out
reason
at the same
I'm
time
saying
as
that,
this.
no, but I'm sorry. Oh yes, oh God, I forgot that little moment. But anyway, the point I was going to make was this: they did not listen to it because it had young people. They lift because young people, guess what? Actually don't want to be treated as though they're idiots, and sometimes want to be taken seriously, and it's sometimes, guess what, interested in ideas and being challenged. So I think they get it wrong even when they try and be in touch with, and you also know what it's like. Oh, we want working class people to listen to us, let's get lots of northern accents. I mean, you just think, oh, stop it, this is driving me mad. Let's learn to speak in tabloid so that we can relate to everyone. All of these attempts by the institution to make themselves relevant miss the content. Great journalism, great ideas do not require that kind of intervention, and I think that's why LBC is so good, Ian.
Oh, thank goodness you said that.
I had to get
because I'm sure my boss would have said never have her back with all of her plugs there. Right, Peter Bone. The question is, how would you privatise the BBC?
Well, I think first of all you've got to get rid of the licence fee. Why should I, who probably not want to necessarily listen to the BBC, why would I have to pay for it? I mean, Question Time in the run-up to Brexit, they had a panel of 5 people. You're lucky if you had one Brexiteer on it.
Tell me about it.
I've never, ever been invited on Question Time. It is biased. And tomorrow in the House of Commons, I will be introducing a bill to have a commission to look at the impartiality of the BBC if we're going to continue to have a state broadcaster. But why should I be forced to pay a licence fee when I subscribe to other channels, take away the licence fee, make it subscription?
Well, is it not a good idea, though, for there to be an independent, impartial broadcaster providing independent news and current affairs? I mean, I would say there are parts of the BBC that you could actually hive off, that they don't need, that a lot of the entertainment stuff is being done by other people. Does that need to be done by the BBC? Their public service remit is to inform, educate and entertain.
But they are biased, Ian.
But they're not doing it.
No, come on.
That's a matter of opinion, isn't it?
And that's why I think they were institutionally for Remain, and they don't know it. And I just
Remainers think the exact opposite.
Well,
exactly.
Just take my one example of Question Time.
Well, you can't have one example.
No,
You've
but
got to look at it over.
Well, you could. I mean, in my humble opinion, they're biased. But why not have a commission to see if they are impartial?
But you see, let's not go on about Question Time. But the panels, you may think, and I would probably have some agreement with you, that they were biased towards Remain over the past couple of years. But the audiences, you cannot say that the audiences were.
Yeah, but but that's not the point. You're the broadcaster.
It's not a point that you agree with.
No, I mean the audiences are not worried about it. It's the people who they put on the panel. I mean, come on. You cannot tell me that the BBC was not pro-Remain, and that is a state broadcast.
I suspect 75-80% of BBC employees voted Remain. You're absolutely right. Andrew Marr said it's a liberal institution, not necessarily pro-Labour, but a liberal institution.
And it's not independent.
But most of the media is. Most of commercial broadcasting, most of the people who work in commercial broadcasting, you could put into the same.
But why I don't have to pay a licence fee to do that? I can choose whether I subscribe.
Jack Dromey.
I bow to no one in my admiration for LBC.
It's not obligatory to say that, but it does help.
But there's no question of it. But the BBC is the world's greatest public service broadcaster, with remarkable traditions and remarkable integrity and innovation to this day. Is that to defend the institution lock, stock and barrel? No. Is that to say that there might not be some changes, a point you made a moment ago, Ian, in terms of what do they do in future? No, I think that's a legitimate debate. My concern, and forgive me if I say this, Peter, I think you wear your prejudices on your sleeve.
Jack, you cannot seriously tell me the BBC was not pro-Remain. Come on, tell me, do you really believe that they were neutral?
Peter, let me speak.
Answer the question.
Let me speak, Peter, is that I think this is partly that reaction saying that somehow they were anti-us, i.e. the Brexiteers, but also there's been a long-standing ideological view on the part of some in and on the margins of government, which has been anti-BBC. God forbid we ever go down the path of Fox News in this country. So what I want to see are commercial broadcasters like LBC, forgive the flattery, who conduct themselves with integrity. But at the heart of our system of news and current affairs and entertainment is a public service broadcaster, the kind of which the BBC is. Just one final point is that the BBC, we talk about it domestically, and incidentally the legitimate debate about audiences and how it broadens its audiences, all of that. But when we talk about audiences, the BBC also has an extraordinary audience worldwide. Time and again in situations of conflict, it gets said, you can trust the BBC. I just do not think it's in the public interest that we should see that public interest broadcasting become history.
Jemma.
I'd be very sad to see the BBC go. I think it has to be slimmed down. The world's changing. Uber comes along, black cabs suffer, the high street's on its knees because of, the world is changing, so they have to adapt. That said, everybody's freaking out about Question Time. They make the best drama, nature programs, podcasts. You can go on and on and on, radio, etc.
Blue Planet.
Exactly. Yeah. And some of the most amazing TV made. It is a bit W1A. I've been there many times. My career started in Disney and then CBeebies, so I have a personal affection for it too. It does need some change, but I agree.
CBeebies to Cross Question. That's quite a journey.
It is a bit, yeah. I was in a spaceship at the time. It was great. This is similarly surreal. No, I do think that when the BBC came back at Nicky Morgan's statement today, they were right in saying don't catastrophise this. It's something that needs addressing. But to compare it to Blockbuster Video, I thought was ridiculous.
It was a strange comparison, it has to be said. Right, we have 15 more minutes with my panel. Keep your calls coming. 0345 6060 973. It's 8:47.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Weekday mornings from 7. LBC.
As you know, on Monday I launched my Enough is Enough campaign as a date emerged over the weekend when Extinction Rebellion are coming back to town. It's set for May. Just to stress, I'm all for peaceful protest, but is there a point at which it starts to trip over? Paul Stevens served as a police officer with the Met for more than 3 decades. You're a member of the Extinction Rebellion Police Liaison Team. You're a former detective sergeant in the Met.
Our people are trying very hard to think of creative ways to bring the message to the media. Unfortunately, the disruption we have created worked.
£42 million it cost the police.
Because there is a massive crisis
this justifies
facing
everything
the
in
world,
law, doesn't it?
Don't you think it should?
No, what, breaking the law?
It justifies non-violent action. What individuals do...
Does it justify breaking the law?
In certain circumstances. And the law...
So I'm sat opposite you, and I'm on the Met side, and I know you're a guy who advocates breaking the law.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast.
With Xero. Get your business digital ready with Xero accounting software.
LBC.
If you're planning on driving on the A501 Euston Road over the next few weeks, there will be lane closures around the junction with Churchway while we carry out essential safety improvements. Works are due to start from Monday the 10th of February for around 7 weeks. All roads in the surrounding area will be extremely busy, so please allow more time for your journey and expect delays in the area. Plan ahead and check alternative routes at tfl.gov.uk. To the Mayor of London and TfL, every journey matters.
My name's Luke. I live in Dunstable with my wife and 4 daughters. We've got a Ring doorbell too out the front. Every time there's someone who comes up to the door, it notifies my phone, and then I can actually see if there's anyone dodgy at the door. A while ago, we had an incident at the house. My wife and I was in bed about 1:30 in the morning. We got a notification on my Ring app on my phone. So I looked on the actual video itself and it showed me that he was trying to get underneath the mat to see if there was a key there so he can actually get into the house. The video clip allowed the police to see exactly who was in front of the camera and where that person was touching the door, and that allowed the crime scene technician to dust for prints. Thanks to the video clip and his fingerprints, that was enough to convict him. The most important thing for me is when I'm not here during the night, I need to know that the family's safe, and Ring Doorbell does that.
Join Luke and the millions of people protecting their homes with Ring. Learn more at ring.com.
Play along with our 10-second teaser. Ready? What is the only number not represented in Roman numerals? The answer is 0. If you got that right, you must be pretty smart. So you'll know who to choose for your business accounting, audit and tax affairs. Search Barnes Rofe. Clever accountants for business.
Ah! Gee, GCSEs, A-levels.
For exam success without the stress, only one name stands out. Justin Craig. A Justin Craig Easter course kickstarts revision, consolidates knowledge, boosts confidence and improves exam technique. With over 30 years' experience, Justin Craig has helped more than 100,000 students secure their university place. For Easter revision course details, visit justincraig.ac.uk. Justin Craig, just in time.
I'm Captain Obvious, and every day people book trips on Hotels.com that you will later hate like. A hate like is when you like Becky's picture of another waterfall even though you kind of hate it because she's there and you're on the train next to a mouth breather. Don't hate like Becky's trip. Book your own with Hotels.com. Hotels.com. Be there, do that.
Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
Adrian says, why can't the BBC have just one advert between programmes? They have like 5 adverts between programmes. It's all advertising their own programmes on other channels. We don't do that so much. Right, Jack Dromey, Claire Fox, Peter Bone and Jemma Forte here with us until 10, when you can listen to Ian Payne. He says there's a little promo for Ian Payne. Right, Tim in Marlow has a question. Tim, go ahead.
It's a very simple one, actually. With the walkout of journalists from Downing Street this week, do you think it's right that Downing Street is trying to politicise the lobby system and who they choose to brief and who they choose not to brief?
Jack?
It is fundamentally wrong. The job of journalism and journalists is to report, hopefully impartially. They don't always succeed in doing that. And to be able to challenge power and the exercise of power. I think it's completely wrong that what you have is a direction of travel, which is, well, we'll talk to some, but we won't talk to others. And the idea that you exclude household name, reputable journalists from being part of the lobby system, I think is absolutely wrong. And I welcome the fact that journalists stood in solidarity with one another. And it's not just, by the way, the national journalists where there's concern. I mean, I was speaking today to the political editor of the Birmingham Mail, and they are gravely concerned also that the regional voice at the next stages might be excluded. So, of course, I mean, I live in the real world. There's always been briefings, selling of stories, the desire to get a front page the following day. But there's also always been something of an integrity in the way that the lobby system has worked. And I do not think it is right that the government does what it does. Absolutely does not surprise me that the Dominic Cummings agenda has taken us down this path, but it's the wrong path to go down.
Do you not think, though, that I'm slightly playing devil's advocate here, but this was not a civil service briefing. This was done by David Frost, who's a special advisor. He's running all the Brexit negotiations. And they picked out, and it wasn't Conservative supporting papers that they were necessarily picking out. I think the BBC, ITV, The Guardian were involved in the selected journalists. Wouldn't it be normal for people to say, well, we want all the biggest circulation papers and the biggest broadcasters in for a private briefing? What's wrong with that?
There's been a historic system which has worked. Why is it changing now? And it's changing now because there's a dynamic in Downing Street which says that what we will do is to pick and choose who we talk to in the media. And I just think that is wrong.
Okay, Peter Bone.
I never really understood this lobby system. It's you talk about putting a level playing field. Well, it's certain journalists that are in the lobby and they get special briefings, which from a government spokesman. My goodness, wouldn't it be better if you just had an open press conference where the spokesman stood on the stage and said what it was and anyone could ask them questions? I don't know why you give certain journalists more privilege than others. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Because it's a two-way thing, isn't it? And Claire, you study the media a lot. It works in both their interests because the government can give off-the-record briefings where they can't be quoted, and that gives the journalists stories. So it's sort of they feed off each other.
There is a certain element of which there's a trust relationship there where they're just opening the doors and having anybody declare themselves a journalist. And as everybody is now a journalist, as in I'm a blogger or something, you probably couldn't work. However, just to say, I'm absolutely with the journalists who walked out. I believe that press freedom is absolutely essential. I'm slightly I'm glad to hear you say that, Jack, because I've actually been very worried and had lots of rows with people in the Labour Party who've actually had a very similar approach to the media, which is, I'm not talking to the Mail, I'm not talking to the Sun, these right-wing newspapers or journalists are not to be trusted. Jeremy Corbyn is not... I know he's on his way out, but he has not covered himself in glory in terms of press freedom. And I think that press freedom is what every political party should be defending. It doesn't matter what side they're on. Of course, journalists are there to hold you to account. We've just had a conversation about whether the BBC's biased. I think its impartiality has been compromised recently. I do think it's not done its job as it should have done. But I definitely don't think that means that, politicians should sulk, as it were. I think that politicians have to actually use the media, go on the media to be held to account. It's a hugely core aspect
and Jack,
of political accountability.
Just to come back to you on that, there is a lot of hypocrisy on this. You have Keir Starmer being holier than thou yesterday, saying this is an absolute disgrace. He refuses to talk to The Sun. You have Jeremy Corbyn, who refuses to talk to all sorts of media outlets. He's never done an interview on LBC since he's been leader. So you can't really get on your high horse on that one.
I've spoken to The Sun over the years and will continue to do so.
Good on you.
I remember when we were campaigning back in 2015 and I was Shadow Police Minister against 22% cuts to the police service on top of the 25% in the first 5 years, and The Sun and the Mail were very important allies in that campaign. So my view is that we have to deal with the media. We don't pick and choose. We have to deal with the media, not least because I agree with Claire's point. They're fundamentally their function, and they can be obnoxious.
And often are.
They can be obnoxious, but fundamentally, in a free society, the freedom of the press is a very important freedom to preserve.
Who are you supporting in the leadership?
Oh, I've nominated Lisa. I think she understands the nature of Labour's long-term decline, and I think that's very welcome indeed.
Jemma?
What, on the question of the press?
Yes.
Okay, so, it backfired, didn't it? Because it's been all over the press. And I agree. I thought it was great to see the journalists showing solidarity in that situation. The guy, Lee Kane, the communications director, he's a civil servant, isn't he? So he's...
Not
paid
sure he is,
by the taxpayer, I think. I thought that was no. Okay, I thought it was rather bit Trumpian, and the fact that it came at the same day. It's obviously sort of Dominic Cummings' latest strategies. It's like we can't mention EU exit. So it's not really happening. And then the fact that no deal is going to be called an Australian deal, and like all of these things coming into play to me look quite sinister. And I don't think the electorate are that stupid. And I think this story did them no favours whatsoever.
But I think I do want to say, though, that however I think, as people who work broadly around the media, that we should also expect a higher standard of journalism. So the reason I say that is because I think the reaction against MSM on the ground amongst ordinary voters is enormous, because they don't trust the media anymore. And so the media, I defend media freedom, but I absolutely find media self-congratulatory smugness drives me mad, because I do think you need to get better, because the reason the BBC is having this problem is because so many voters don't trust them anymore. People actually feel that journalism somehow has got embroiled in taking sides in a way that they don't like. So I think that one needs to improve politics on all sides.
Okay, final text question from Anne in Kingsthorpe, who says, after David Cameron's security guard left his gun in a plane toilet, what's the worst thing that you've forgotten? Gemma?
I went to a friend's house for lunch once, and I'd been sitting with my friend for about an hour, and I said, where's my baby? And he was in the hall in the car seat, and he was just looking at the wall. He was a very passive baby.
You're a very bad mother.
I know. Don't worry, he's fine, everybody.
You're the Sue Ellen
he's 13
Ewing
now.
of this panel.
I hadn't even had a drink, I was just tired.
Jack Dromey.
I remember one very embarrassing moment when somebody I'd known for about 25 years, and I was introducing him to some other colleagues with whom I was meeting. Momentarily, his name slipped out of my mind, and I had to blank my way through it until eventually I remembered what his name was. I don't think he necessarily noticed, but I felt acutely embarrassed afterwards.
I remember Ed Ball, that happened to Ed Balls in a live interview once, where he was being asked about, name some of your top business supporters, and he said Bill. And it was the chief executive of Iceland, but he couldn't remember his surname. Peter Bone.
Like Jack, I once had Michael Heseltine to be introduced in the by-election when Neil Kinnock stood down and had the huge press conference, and I couldn't remember his name, so I just said it's somebody who needs no introduction.
So a loose interpretation of the word forgotten, but you're right. Claire?
I had a very brief time as a driver, and I bought a new car, and I parked it, in the first week, and I hadn't got a clue where it was, and I spent a week not knowing where I'd parked it and not telling anyone because I was so humiliated. But because I didn't know I had a car, it never really came out, and I've now just admitted it. But I mean, what a numpty I was.
Well, my only contribution to this is that my parents forgot me at the Essex show in Chelmsford when I was 2 years old. And I was wandering around the Essex show for about half an hour, apparently, before someone found me. And they found me picking up cigarette ends and eating them. What a high note to end the programme on. Peter Bone, Claire Fox, Jack Dromey and Jemma Forte, thank you very much indeed. In a moment, we'll have an update on the plane crash in Turkey in which one person has died and 157 were injured. And we'll be talking about bullying. And if you've reported bullying and no one believed you, what effect did that have on your life? It's 9:01.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock. Shortly, the US Senate is expected to acquit Donald Trump following his impeachment trial. He's accused of asking the leader of Ukraine to investigate his Democratic rival Joe Biden, something he strongly denies. Republican Senator Mitt Romney has said he'll vote to remove Mr.